Hi, I'm Angel with FleeceFun.com and with Shannon Fabrics. Today we're continuing our Nesting the Nursery series where we use a Cuddle Strip Kit and a few extra materials to make everything you see here. In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make the Burp cloth out of Cuddle Terry with the Cuddle binding. Now I really like this version because first of all the Cuddle Terry is so soft, it's wonderful. And of course, you know, Cuddle Fleece, it's just, Cuddle Fabric's wonderful. I also like it because it's a little bit thinner at the shoulder, so it fits really well on your shoulder, and then it widens out, and it has a lot of great coverage. And it's a little more boutique style, and it's a unique Burp cloth. For this project, you're going to need some of the Cuddle Terry. Be sure you wash and dry your terry cloth before beginning this project. One, it eliminates a ton of fuzz, and two, it does shrink a little bit in the wash, and you want to pre-shrink it so you don't have any heartache later, because as you know, you're going to wash your terry cloth a lot. Cuddle fabric, you don't have to worry about prepping because it won't shrink in the wash, so you can just get started with it. You'll want Fleece Fun's free pattern that's available at fleecefun.com. You will also, of course, want some basic materials. You're going to want a walking foot that we're going to use. You're also going to want a stretch needle on your machine, a number 90 stretch needle. And of course, scissors, thread, those sort of things. Now we're actually going to be learning how to do the binding, and this binding is important because you're actually going to use it on the receiving blanket. And so it's kind of a practice run to teach you how to do binding before we start on our blanket. So what you're going to do is you're going to assemble the pattern. Instructions on how to do that can be found on fleecefun.com's channel. Then you're going to cut out your terry cloth. You're going to place it on the fold and cut out one. So when you unfold it, you get this. You're also going to cut the binding. You're going to cut 2-inch strips. And the length isn't as important because we can lengthen it. We can add length to it, but you're going to want to cut out a few of those strips for the binding in a coordinating fabric. Now actually when you do that, you're going to do that out of the 1.5 yard fabric. You're not going to take one of your strips from your Cuddle Strip Kit, so we're doing that separately. Alright, once you have all those things cut out, it's time to start sewing. Now when you're making the binding, your strips might not be long enough to go all the way around, so what you're going to need to do is to lengthen them. To do that, it's really simple actually. What you're going to do is you're going to take the ends of two, right sides together so they're perpendicular. Okay, so they're forming a square. And then you can put in a pin if you want, but it's so small you probably don't have to. What you're going to do is you're going to sew diagonally across it, just like that. And that's going to make it come together. So it's kind of like magic. I'm going to show you what I mean. And you're just going to use a basic straight stitch, and you're just going to sew diagonally across. Easy, easy. And actually while you're doing this, you might as well just make this one huge long strip. Trim this down, so we don't want all of that bulk. It's really close to it, but don't cut through your stitches. Doesn't have to be perfect. And it just makes it come together. Easy, easy. So it's pretty seamless and fast. Now we're ready to attach the binding to the terry cloth, and it's important that you finish off terry cloth because it will unravel, and this is a great way to practice binding. So what we're going to do is we're going to start pinning it. Now some sewists are good enough that they don't need to pin it and they can just sew it on. I'm not. I fully admit it. In any case, you're going to want to leave a little bit of room here for when we attach the binding to itself, which I'll show you how to do. But what we're going to do is we're just going to work our way along, and we're just going to pin it. Again, notice I'm pinning it this way, not this way, because it can slide. It just helps the Cuddle fabric stay in place better. So pin it all the way around, and the curve's gentle enough it should just flow around it just fine. Okay, so I've pinned it all the way around. I've gotten to that tail I left there. I'm actually going to cut it off, and I'm going to leave a little bit of a tail, so it's purposefully too long here. And I'm not going to deal with this just yet. I'm going to deal with this at the very end when I've sewn up to this point, and then I'll deal with this because the fabric can shift and stretch a little bit, and I don't want to cause an unnecessary bubble. So we're going to wait to deal with the end, but you're just going to trim it off. We're going to set our long grouping aside there. And now what we're going to do is, using a straight stitch, we're going to sew all the way around this. I'll be using my walking foot, and I'm going to show you what to do with the walking foot on curves, because you can't just force it underneath because that's going to ruin your stitch. If you do, basically it's just a matter of lifting and turning the walking foot a little bit just to get the curve that you want. And again, this is kind of practice for our receiving blanket that we're going to be making next. So we're going to first start off with doing straight stitch all the way around with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. On my walking foot, that's just the edge of my walking foot, so it makes it really easy for me. Just going to sew a straight stitch all the way around. You might want to check the tension on it. You're going to want a little bit looser tension and a little bit longer of a stitch when you're working with these fabrics, and it looks great. So you're going to sew all the way around until you get to this tail here, and you're going to stop a little short because we want a little bit of room to play with. So what you're going to do is you're just going to finish up your seam and take it out. And then you're going to have these fabrics right here. So there's a couple of different ways to do this. For a beginner, the easiest way is just to join it together. Just like that. Kind of line up so you can see that's kind of where it matches up. Put a pin there. And just sew them together straight. You can do something where you cut angles, but I think for beginners this is just the easiest way. It looks fine. It doesn't really stick out. If you do, I mean, it's not that big of a deal, honestly. And it's the easiest way. So if you're a beginner and this is your first time doing binding, this is the way you want to do it. You're just going to do straight stitch. So I'm going to kind of line it up there. And we're just going to sew these two pieces together straight across. Easy, easy. So there you have your pieces together. We're going to snip this tail off. So we don't need this fabric anymore. And then we're going to just sew right across and sew it back on. That's where I connected the two pieces. And that's it. You've got part one of our binding completed. Now for this next part, we're actually not going to use pins. It's actually easier not to use pins. So what you're going to go through is you're going to trim your threads. And the other thing is, because this is a curved piece, we're going to make it a little bit easier on ourselves. And we're going to go to these curves right here. And we're going to just, you can already see how this is starting to roll a little bit because it's a curve. And we don't want it to roll like that because it can get bunchy in our binding. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take some scissors. I've got my handy little tool here. And we're just going to snip slits in the curve here. We're going to do that throughout the whole burp cloth. Just these little slits make a big difference. You can see how already that it's losing that roll right there. So we're just going to snip some slits. I'm going to do it on the other side. And then we're going to start finishing off our binding. But now we're going to finish off the binding. Now on my machine, I'm going to set it to that serpentine stitch, serpentine, potato, whatever you want to call it. And I'm going to set it to a wide stitch. I'm going to check my stitch length and my tension. I'm going to make sure the tension's a little looser and my stitch length is a little longer. And now what we're going to do is, you're going to see we did a 2-inch strip. We sewed with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So we fold that up, that makes an inch, and then we're going to fold this down and over, and there's our binding. Now, as you go, it's easier just to fold as you go. Normally, I'm really big on pinning and working with the pins, but in this case, it's actually easier and works better if you just fold it by hand. And what you're kind of going to do is you're just going to do this in pulses. Now, another tip I'm going to tell you is you're going to kind of turn it and pinch the fabric to hold it into place. Now, as I'm pinching, I can feel the ridge of the underlying seam. And what I'm going to try to do my best is to keep that dead center with my needle. By doing this, it makes it really nice and even on both sides. Okay, just a little trick I picked up. So while you're doing this, feeling it is very important. And it's important to get good at this because we're going to use this on blankets. And this trick, actually, you're going to use a lot. So you're going to want to get used to this. So what we're going to do is we're just going to start that stitch. My old machine, I've got to back it up. So what you're going to do is you're just going to kind of do this in pulses. You're going to get your fabric lined up, sew it, get it lined up, and sew it. And you're just going to keep doing this all the way around. Now, as you're working with the fabric, you're going to come up to those curved pieces. And while you can kind of work with it a little bit more when it's a straight stitch, you can't when you're doing the side of it. You really need to stop, lift your needle and your foot. I should say leave your needle in, lift your foot to work your way around the curve. And I'll show you that in just a second. So as you can see, it kind of rolls itself, but we're kind of getting up to this really curvy section around the base. So what I'm going to do, see how it's starting to get a little crooked underneath the needle. I'm going to make sure my needle is in, lift my foot, and straighten it out. This will give you the most even stitch, and it also causes it sometimes if you try to force the cloth to turn underneath your walking foot, it will cause it to skip stitches, and you don't want that. You want your stitches to be nice and consistent. So, and we're just going to keep on working with that roll, pitching underneath to feel the other seam. And again, we're starting to kind of get a little angled here, so I'm going to straighten this out. Fix that little bunch up right there. And this is what you're going to do all the way around, and it gives you that beautiful stitch, which you can see there. Looks good on the other side. If you're more adventurous, if you want, you can use a contrasting thread to make it really pop, or a more decorative stitch. It's really up to you, but for a beginner, this is a good way to go, and especially if you're learning how to bind things like we're going to do in our receiving blanket, this is ideal. So I'm just going to continue doing this all the way around, and that's it. That's the big secret. And this gives you beautiful binding. It feels great with the terry cloth, and it looks beautiful on the finished project, or product. There you have it. You have this great boutique style burp cloth that I love. The terry is so soft, it's really absorbent, and they work great. And they look really cute to go with all of your nursery decor. So now that we've learned how to do binding, it's time to move on to our receiving blanket. So that's one of the tutorials I have coming up, along with several others. Everything you see on this chair we're going to cover. Special thanks to Shannon Fabrics for sponsoring the fabric that we're using in these tutorials. And remember to check out these tutorials and more on my website, fleecefun.com. And remember, velvet is pretentious, fleece is fun.